we're photographing the menu for Leo K, our good friends. So let's get to it. Come on.
First thing I want to go over with you is the first introductory call that I have with Tyler, one of the owners of Leo K. And I want to go over what the name means and what made us think of this location, obviously the shop itself, and the style of the shoot. A lot of people go straight into the pre-production of the deck and the gear, but I want to talk about the purpose of the lighting, the purpose of the style of photography that we did, because at the end of the day, I'm looking to meet the needs of the client, not just make something aesthetically pleasing. So I have some loose ideas here from what I talked about with the client and what they needed. One of the first things obviously is they only have 12 items on their menu, so not a lot, it's a pretty limited menu, which means we can try and be a little bit more experimental with the shots that we do have. If the menu were huge, due to our time constraint, if we were smart, we'd kind of limit how weird we get with the ideas so that we can shoot everything in a good amount of time. The second thing was what he described. That I highlighted some of the words that he used to describe the brand and describe kind of the vibe he wanted to give off. And I want to kind of highlight some of those. One of the first was he likes the idea that this feels very ALD, Aime Leon Dore adjacent. Some of the descriptors of that brand would be luxury, high-end, right? But it still feels so approachable. And I think a lot of that approachableness comes from how warm the photos are and how soft the lighting is. So I highlighted that and I bolded that so that I remembered that approach of high-end but still approachable. Lastly, this is the name, what the name means, Lay OK. And Lay is meant to be a nod to French fancy, right? Part of that ALD appeal, a high-end quality, and that speaks to the quality of the juice and the quality to all the items they have on the menu. And the OK means you can relax. All right, let's move on to the mood board. Now that we have the notes from the clients, let's look through how we organize ourselves for the shoot. So one of the first things you'll see here, obviously, we've got the name, we've got the weather, the sunset time. We're using natural light, and so what time the sun sets and rises is important, and even the weather that day. Next, we've got the menu, which is really just the shot list, and so I kind of made an order that I think would make sense from easiest to most difficult to make, so that we could stay on track that day. And then this is the call sheet. This is a mixture of both the shot list and, of course, the order that we're shooting, but also what time we're getting there, what time we're leaving, and when we're making selects, and just to keep both us and the client on the same page. All right, let's get to the mood board. So one of the first things you'll see here, I found this on Instagram. I love this soft lighting. I feel like really accurately describes that both luxury and approachable photography that we're looking for. So you'll see it looks great. A lot of this is obviously the label design, the texture. So you'll see a lot of soft light for these commercial projects from these luxury brands. And this is, of course, ALD itself and how they photograph their products. So you'll see overall, this is a pretty short mood board. It's a pretty small mood board. I wanted to make sure we stayed on track, and I wanted to make sure I didn't have too many ideas for that day. And I really just wanted to give them a good reference for the lighting. A lot of people use the mood board as just something to use for the day of. We use this mood board and this pre-production deck to really make sure the client understands what they're getting themselves into and what the final product would be. And so we made sure they loved all of these inspiration images, that they loved all of these images, so that at the end, when we're delivering it and we're using obviously the references to finalize everything, they're not surprised with what they're getting. All right, let's move on to gear, lighting, and camera settings. One of the first things we do is we're tethering it straight from the camera to the laptop so that we have all the image files both on the camera SD card and directly to an SSD. It avoids any, accidents or whatever, and it's just an immediate backup for all your images. So we're tethering directly. We just actually use the Sony Imaging Edge app, and that's been great so far. I know Capture One is the industry standard and much better, but for what we do, it works fine, and no one's been able to tell a difference. So I want to break down the lighting for this. You'll see we're using a huge diffuser that I got on B&H. This diffuser basically brings that window that we normally use for natural light, brings it way closer to the product, which gives us softer shadows. Behind that, you'll see the Godox AD200 acting as the sun. I put some distance between it, and we have a little attachment there to kind of make sure that the light is pretty focused. And that light is just shooting directly through that diffuser to act as, like I said, a natural window. And the reason why we're not using natural light for this is when you're doing an online menu, you need all the photos and the lighting to be consistent between each item. And so if we use natural light, any cloud coverage, any change in sun would kind of change how the light casts and the shadow cast on the item. And we needed something a little bit more consistent. So we're using the Sony a7 IV to shoot these images, 33 megapixels, which is plenty. And we're using the 35 to 150 lens from Tamron. We like shooting our product shots, small product shots, around 100. So we shot all of these at 116 millimeters. So yeah, a7 IV, we're shooting at 1/160th of a second. That's more for the curtain of the flash. So and then we're getting no ambient lighting. It is pitch black in there without the light, at least to the camera. Our aperture is at f10, so it's easier to cut things out. F10 generally is, f8 would be the minimum for something that has quite a bit of depth if you want to cut something out on Photoshop. So f10 is kind of where we landed. And then ISO 1250, a little higher than we would have wanted, but we did want a little bit actually. I ended up wanting a little bit more natural light from the window. You'll see actually the only shot I have with no flash is right here. And you'll see there's just a little bit of warm natural light coming in. And so we ended up wanting just a little bit of that. So it wasn't so commercial, if that makes sense. All right, and lastly, we liked the way the natural window light looked. It fell really nicely on the shadows of every product. However, it still needed a little bit more bounce. The shadows were still a little bit too dark for my preference. And so we have this, it's just a small white bounce card for smaller products. And we just kind of shoved that a little closer to the items so that there was just a softer shadow that wasn't so dark on the other side. The reason why I used cream is I knew some of the cups were going to be white. And if we use the white background, trying to cut the cup from the white background was going to be pretty difficult given how soft this light was. So cream allows that white to pop a little bit more and kind of gave us that ALD edge we were looking for. One of the first things you'll notice with our editing is we've got a few phases that we go about editing product images. It'd be great if we could do all of it on Photoshop. Just the way we like to do it, we like to add a little bit of texture and some things that really are much easier to do on Photoshop. So one of the first things you'll see here is, obviously this is right out of camera. Really happy with how this looks right out of camera, which is important. And on Lightroom, I apply a very minimal adjustment. So this is what it looks like on the cup. And I want to show you on this orange drink right here. We've got right out of camera, raw, and after. So you see very minimal, a little bit of vibrance, a little bit of curve adjustments here with color, a little bit of, here's that curve adjustments. And you'll see with these white backgrounds or cream backgrounds, I need to do a lot of adjustments to the highlights to get a lot of that information back so that when I'm editing on Photoshop, it's a little bit easier to get a more consistent color. I'm adjusting some of the hue to make sure it's accurate. It's very important with these product images that the hue and the vibrance of the actual product is accurate digitally, and no grain, which is very important, obviously, as in Photoshop. If we're adjusting the background, I want all the grain to match. So I add all grain on Photoshop for heavy adjustments like this. So let's move over to Photoshop. And I want to go back now to the kind of vibier image we have. And you'll see that what I import to Photoshop is this right here, right? This is directly from Lightroom. Here's what I realized after I exported it and I was going to apply some very basic adjustments. It was missing a vibe. It was missing some sort of, I don't know, vibe is kind of the best word I can think of, but it was missing something, right? And so what I did is I added a few adjustment layers, and I'll show you these here. One of the first things I did was add texture. So you'll see here, this texture is gritty. It looks really dark. I love the way it looks, but you'll see it's really messing up all the oranges and all the shadows. So you'll see here, I'll add a levels adjustment to bring all that darkness back up. I'll adjust the oranges here, and I'll add a curves adjustment to kind of fix some of that. The last thing I did was add a little bit of a photo filter. My favorite actually warm photo filter is 81 on Photoshop. It's a little bit green, and I really like the way it looks. Here it is raw. Here it is after Lightroom. And here it is after those level adjustments. You'll see it's darker. It's a lot more vibey, and it, I think, matches that ALD vibe, that luxury but still approachable vibe that we were going for earlier. So you'll see a lot of that texture, a lot of that color, and of course the contrast with the milk coming in, I think, looks a lot better. And let's go back to that coffee cup. So right out of the camera, the first thing you'll notice is this coffee cup. The first thing I do is I remove the background. Easy, right? And then I add some levels. I increase the brightness of it just a little bit, using an S curve to get that brightness, like I said, from the high end, because that cream background kind of softens a lot of the highlights. And so to give it a little bit more contrast, I'm adding an S curve and brightening up those highlights and those midtones so that I have some more room to work with. I'm going to make that Lay OK label a little bit more blue. I'm going to make the coffee a little darker. I'm going to add that filter that I showed you earlier that I really liked. This one actually might be a little bit different. This is 82. This is also my favorite blue one. And you'll see it's just a 2%, super subtle. Although they like the warm, it still needs to be accurate. And I felt like the warm textures weren't as accurate for the smoothie. So we did a cooling filter. And then we'll move on to shadows. Level 1 shadows right here. And all we do is we use the original image. And I do select color range, and I'll choose a color range from the shadows and midtones to select the darkest. So you'll see the darkest here. I've got a color overlay on this so that you can see the darkest first, so that there's levels to the shadows, not just one big monochrome color shadow, which I feel like doesn't look natural. And then we've got the level 2 shadow. Together makes, at least in my opinion, a pretty natural looking shadow. All right, last up right here. First things first, we cut out the smoothie. I do this with a pen tool and a little bit of adjustment from this select subject tool on Photoshop. It's great. And then you'll see obviously the same cream color background. All right, we've selected the subject. Now I'm gonna fix some of the label. You'll see some of the label is a little messy. There's a little bit of some spots to it, so I fix that label, add some levels adjustment, and you'll see here I add a mask to make sure the straw doesn't get too dark. Very niche, boring stuff. S-curve, same thing for brightness. That orange, I want to make sure it's consistent across the smoothie. In this case, I think this is a juice, actually. And then same thing with the Lay OK label. I want it to be consistent across all the products. Depending on the drink, depending on the lighting, depending on a bunch of different factors, a lot of times the same color in the same exact spot will look different. And so I use Photoshop to make sure it's consistent across the whole menu. And then there's that photo filter that I like. And the last thing I want to show you before we end this video is to get all the products consistent across, there's two things that I use. I use this black square, and I use this, the outline of a shape to make sure that it's all the exact same size. And so you'll see between all the cups so that when you're looking at the menu digitally, you'll notice just subtle differences if they're not all in the exact same spot. And so I use kind of the pen tool to outline the first one, and then I make the rest of them consistent across. So anyways, that's how we do a menu photo shoot for a juice shop. Thank you to Lay OK for letting us photograph your menu and being good friends of ours. If you haven't already checked them out on Instagram, please do so. I'll put the links to everything here in the details and description. Thank you to Ketan for filming all of this beautiful B-roll that you see. And yeah, thanks for subscribing and watching. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below, or you can DM me on Instagram at @CheckYourSwing or Juicebox at Juicebox Portland. Subscribe. Peace.
Juicebox is awesome. Best day of my life. Oh, okay. Jeez. Bossy.